Kaya nga, nakakapagod na kapag pinaglalaroan ka.
Uy! Nandiyan pala kayo ha. Gusto ko lang ipaalam sa inyo na meron ng EVC Films dyan sa YouTube. Kaya ano pang hinihintay ninyo? Mag-subscribe na!
Toilet paper at tissue boxes mo. Hindi mo ba alam, mauubos daw ang mga tissue products? Bakit naman? Ang raw materials daw ng mask at tissue products ay iisa lang. Saan naman galing ang balitang yan? Ay basta, narinig ko lang din. Maraming din kayang nagpo-post sa Facebook at Twitter, kaya kung ako sa'yo, kumuha ka na din. Sige na't mauna na ako sa'yo
Huwag basta-basta magpaniwala
sa mga nakikita.
Una babasa sa social media.
Magsaliksik at i-verify ang lahat ng impormasyon.
Nakukuha sa internet.
Tandaan,
Maging responsable tayo
sa paggamit ng social media,
Nang hindi magdulot ng panic sa iba.
kung paano dapat labanan ng COVID-19.
Ay gayon din ang ating pagsugpo.
sa black propaganda
At maling impormasyon.
Dennis Lu,
Lou Omelda,
Region Alfartosa,
Tyranel Pililu.
Hannibal Arevalo,
EBC,
Japan,
Euro,
we live in interesting times.
Protektahan ang sarili laban sa coronavirus disease o COVID-19.
Narito ang ilang paalala.
Takpan ang ilong at bibig sa tuwing babahing at uubo. Gamitin ang looban ng siko. Kung gagamit naman ng tissue, ay tiyaking maitapon ito agad sa tamang basurahan. Iwasang hawakan ang ilong o bibig. Ugaliing maghugas ng mga kamay gamit ang sabon at umaagos na tubig o magpahid ng alcohol-based sanitizer.
Gumamit ng face mask kung ikaw ay may ubot sipon. O kaya naman ay may inaalaga ang pasyente na mayroong simptomas ng respiratory illness. Itapon ng gamit na face mask sa tamang basurahan.
Sundin ang social distancing. Panatilihin ang 1 metrong layo mula sa ibang tao, lalo na kapag nasa labas ng bahay. Kung maaari ay umiwas muna sa mga matataong lugar.
Laging tandaan, mahalaga ang kalinisan upang sakit ay maiwasan.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. We're moving to the next stage of the pandemic, and as the world resets to the new normal, we find ourselves seeking the right balance between health and livelihood, constantly adjusting the boundaries between liberty and responsibility. Here are tonight's news. First to India, where authorities has warned that they expect cases in the Indian capital to shoot up almost 20 times to more than 500,000 in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, public health expert Priti Kumar calls for a sustained campaign on behavior change as some lockdown eases.
80% of people are not going to feel ill. They're going to have very mild symptoms. But that's the threat, because if young people know that they are not going to have an illness, then the risk perception goes down hugely. So as long as you're in a lockdown, you're in a state of fear and you are bound by the lockdown. But as it opens up, and then the feeling, your risk perception goes down markedly. So I think it needs to have there has to be a very high sustained campaign on behavior change, of people being told that you youngsters, you young people, you are not going to have a severe infection, but you are going to take it back to your homes where your parents and your grandparents are going to be very vulnerable to it. Because we are reactive to the epidemic. We've never been in a situation where we could be responsive to the epidemic. So as the numbers change daily, there's a reaction to how you can actually adapt the guideline to the unfolding situation. And that does create problems. We must remember that this is not only a health crisis, and it is not being managed only as a health crisis. This is a humanitarian crisis, a political challenge, a social crisis. So when you are at such a low level of health readiness, even in a steady state, the ability to face a challenge where even the rich countries in Europe and US could not cope up with it, I think is an impossibility. We can only prepare to what is best available for us.
India is easing its national lockdown to ease the devastating economic blow dealt by the virus, but the disease is still raging across the world's second most populous nation with around 270,000 reported infections, the fifth highest caseload in the world. It has reported almost 10,000 new infections in the past 24 hours, with crowded megacities like Mumbai and Delhi the worst hit. Manish Sisodia, Delhi's deputy chief minister, said after a crisis meeting that authorities expected infections to soar 550,000 by the end of July, up from almost 30,000 at present. He also said the city of around 20 million people, where hospitals are already stretched and anecdotal evidence suggests crematoriums are struggling, needed 80,000 hospital beds. Delhi's health minister last week said that it had around 9,000 beds available for coronavirus patients. Barbers and hairdressers in Malaysia are back in business as the lockdown to contain the spread of the coronavirus is eased. And many people make a beeline for their first haircut in nearly 3 months. Take a look.
I feel relieved and happy at the same time. Yeah, because this is my first haircut after like 4 months.
Malaysian Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin announced on Sunday that the country's first ever Movement Control Order, or MCO, will continue until August 31 under the new Recovery Movement Control Order, or RMCO, set to begin on June 10. Prime Minister Muhyiddin also said interstate travel will be allowed to resume on June 10 with the exception of the areas declared under an Enhanced Movement Control Order, or EMCO, as the nation moves towards the COVID-19 recovery stage. Malaysia has been under an the MCO, and a subsequent relaxed version, which is known as the CMCO, or Conditional Movement Control Order, for more than 2 months since March 18, with the sixth phase, or the current CMCO, scheduled to end June 9, or has ended on June 9. Singapore is setting up screening centers across the island as it ramps up testing to contain the spread of the coronavirus, as some workers return to work after a partial lockdown lasting nearly 2 months. Take a look.
Test is good for us. We can know how's my condition. So test good for me.
4 such centers have so far been set up. The city-state is relying on aggressive testing and contact tracing to contain the spread of the coronavirus as it gradually eases restriction. Singapore has reported 38,965 coronavirus cases and 25 deaths. Authorities are continuing to test migrant workers living in dormitories who have been the worst hit, and have started testing those who are returning to work in construction, shipyards, or in petroleum or chemical processing plants. Eagle News will be right back.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Malaking tulong sa bawat pamilyang Pilipino ang home gardening.
Hindi lang makakatipid dahil hindi nabibili ng kakailanganing pagkain, makakaiwas pa sa kakulangan sa nutrisyon. Pero kung ang bawat pamilya ay nagtatanim kahit sa maliliit na container o paso, nakasisiya itong tingnan, lalo na't kung ito'y iyon na ang aanihin. Kapag may kalamidad, tumataas ang halaga ng pagkain at nagkukulang ang supply nito.
Kung ang lahat ay may panahon sa pagtatanim, kahit sa sariling bahay o sa bakuran, pwedeng ibenta ang sobrang ani.
Kung lahat tayo ay nagtatanim, hindi ka na mamumroblema sa budget.
Tiyak pa ang seguridad sa pagkain.
All right, welcome back. Subject to social distancing guidelines, retailers in England will now be allowed to reopen on June 15. Joining us live from the United Kingdom is Graham Thomas. Hello, Graham.
Hi, Elma. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Okay, so the number of suspected and confirmed deaths from coronavirus in Britain has now passed the grim milestone of 50,000, the government said on Tuesday. Business Secretary Alex Sharma cited analysis from the Office for National Statistics, or ONS, which said 50,107 people have now died in the outbreak. The ONS assessed all deaths where COVID-19 was either mentioned or suspected on the death certificate up to May 29. The toll is now Europe's worst and the second highest in the world, behind the United States, although each country does have different reporting methods and lag times. The ONS data also showed that deaths in England and Wales exceeded the average of the last 5 years by 57,961 in the 10-week period since the outbreak took hold in March this year. Despite the figures, British Secretary for State for International Development of the United Kingdom, Alex Sharma, said infection and death rates are falling, and the UK lockdown, which has been in force since March, could be eased further. He also confirms that non-essential retail businesses will be allowed to open on June 15th if they are COVID secure. Let's listen in.
I can confirm today that retail outlets, which have been required to be closed, will be able to open their doors again from Monday, the 15th of June, so long as they comply with the COVID secure guidelines we published on the 25th of May. To support this, on the 25th of May, my department published updated COVID secure, safer working guidance for people who work in or run shops or branches in the retail sector. This has given retail businesses enough time to make sure their premises are COVID secure.
Sharma also said this is the latest step in the careful restarting of our economy and will enable high streets up and down the country to spring back into life. He added that the 2-meter social distancing rule in place in the UK would remain when shops reopen, despite speculation it might be relaxed. But he ruled out reopening pubs and restaurants until at least July 4 at the very earliest. The government is also expected to announce on Wednesday further plans to ease lockdown restrictions in England later, with zoos and drive-in cinemas among the businesses expected to be allowed to reopen from Monday. On Wednesday, the Prime Minister is expected to announce that outdoor attractions where visitors remain in their cars can reopen because the risk of spreading the disease is lower outside. However, zoos will be told that they must not open or reopen indoor exhibitions such as reptile houses and must ensure amenities including cafes and takeaways are only takeaway only. A Downing Street official said people are continuing to make huge sacrifices to reduce the spread of coronavirus and avoid a second spike, but we know it is tough. And where we can safely open up more attractions and it is supported by the science, we will do so.
Okay, so Graham, can you run that through me again? Which businesses are open and which are not?
Okay, Alma, there is a full list of different businesses that can open this month and those that are not allowed. So we'll go through those that are not allowed first. Okay. Restaurants, bars and pubs, cafes and canteens, hairdressers, barbers, beauty and nail salons, piercing and tattoo parlors, holiday accommodation, including hotels, hostels, B&Bs, holiday rentals, campsites and boarding houses, caravan parks and sites for commercial uses, libraries, community centers, places of worship, museums and galleries, nightclubs, cinemas, theaters and concert halls, bingo halls, spas and massage parlors, skating rinks, indoor fitness studios, gyms, swimming pools and other indoor leisure activities, indoor arcades, bowling alleys, soft play centers and similar facilities, fun fairs, playgrounds, outdoor gyms and outdoor swimming pools. And all the retailers that will be able to reopen on June the 15th are retailers such as food retailers, chemists, hardware and homeware stores, fashion shops, charity shops, bedding shops and arcades, tailors, dress fitters and fashion designers, car dealerships, auction houses, antique stores, retail art galleries, photography studios, gift shops, and retail spaces in theaters, museums, libraries, heritage sites, and tourism sites, mobile phone stores, indoor and outdoor markets, craft fairs, zoos, safari parks, bedding shops, and outdoor cinemas. It's been reported that this is a necessity, a careful process, but we hope that reopening of safari parks and zoos will help provide families with more options to spend time outdoors while supporting the industry caring for these incredible animals. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much, Graham, for your report. Thank you, EBC, United Kingdom Bureau.
This is Brother Graham. This is Graham Thomas from EBC News in the United Kingdom. We live in interesting times.
All right, Diplomatic Chief Joseph Borrell said the European Commission will recommend EU member states to begin to reopen their external frontiers to travelers from outside the bloc from July 1st. Let's listen.
The lifting of temporary travel restrictions at external borders will come at the second stage. And in this respect, later this week, the College will adopt its assessment of travel restrictions and will put forward an approach for the gradual and partial lifting of these restrictions as of the 1st of July. With certain third countries taking into account a number of principles and criteria and based on a common coordinated approach by member states supported by the Commission. But
the decision on easing restrictions imposed to slow the spread of the coronavirus rests with national capitals, but Mr. Borrell said Brussels would suggest a gradual and partial lifting of the ban. EU member states have begun to ease temporary restrictions on non-essential crossings of the borders within the bloc, with a goal of June 15 for restoring free travel. At the weekend, the interior ministers of the 27 member states agreed to coordinate a gradual reopening to travelers from outside the Schengen area, Britain and the EU. But Home Affairs Commissioner Ylva Johansson said last week that not all countries agreed on the criteria for reopening, with some in more of a hurry than others. Greece, for example, whose economy depends heavily on tourism, has already announced it will reopen its skies from June 15 to a list of countries including non-EU states such as Australia, China, and South Korea. Meanwhile, the German government extended a travel ban for countries outside the European Union until August 31st over ongoing concerns linked to the coronavirus pandemic in a blow to top summer destinations like Turkey. Germany introduced an unprecedented warning against all foreign travel in mid-March at the height of the coronavirus outbreak. But from Monday, Germans will be able to travel freely again to EU member states as well. Britain, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said the decision to extend the travel ban for the so-called third countries, those outside the EU and the no-passport Schengen zone, was necessary because of a lack of shared criteria and coordination process with those countries in a case of virus flare-up or in case of a virus flare-up. Turkey will be among those hardest hit by the extended travel ban, as the Mediterranean country is Germans' third favorite destination after Spain and Italy. Thailand and Egypt are also popular holiday spots for Germans during the European summer holiday period. Chancellor Angela Merkel's cabinet, however, also agreed that exceptions could be made to lift travel warnings on a case-by-case basis, depending on a positive development in the pandemic and other criteria, such as a country's health system and clear rules on social distancing and mask wearing. In other news, Chief Prosecutor Christer Peterson tells a press conference that the main suspect in the 1986 unsolved murder of Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme is Stig Enstrom, a Swedish man who died in 2000, known as Skandia Man. Because the suspect is dead, the investigation will now be closed. Peterson says Olof Palme, a charismatic yet divisive Social Democrat Prime Minister, was shot dead outside a cinema in Stockholm in February of 1986. Let's take a look.
On a eu une législation sociale, une politique de l'économie.
Jag ska be att Hans Melander berätta lite kring, eller också om misstankarna är starkare, att anhålla honom.
L'Europe, ce n'est pas seulement Paris, Bruxelles et Londres, c'est aussi Varsovie et...
In other news, Chinese fighter jets briefly entered Taiwan's airspace, forcing the island to scramble its own, according to Taipei, shortly after announcing plans for its largest annual live-fire military drill. The Taiwanese Defense Ministry said it broadcast warnings and took active responses to dispel multiple Chinese Su-30 fighters to the southwest of the island. China has ramped up fighter flights and warship crossings near Taiwan or through the Taiwan Strait since President Tsai Ing-wen was first elected in 2016, as she has refused to acknowledge that the island is part of one China. President Tsai lashed out at Beijing for meaningless and unnecessary military moves after the Chinese military jet in February briefly crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait, separating the two sides. Now Beijing claims Taiwan as part of its territory and has vowed to one day seize it by force if necessary. It was the first major incursion since President Tsai's landslide re-election in January. The incursion also came as the ministry announced the Han Kuang live fire drill would be held next month, including computer simulations and an exercise to defend against forces landing on the island. Police charged at protesters and used pepper spray as several thousand demonstrators marched the Central District of Hong Kong on Tuesday evening, defying authorities a year after huge pro-democracy protests erupted. Take a look.
Within this year, so many different things happened, and which we cannot imagine in the past. For example, the police or the government, we didn't expect they will do such serious action to the normal citizens.
Human right. We're fighting for freedom in Hong Kong. We're fighting against police brutality, how they're treating the people of Hong Kong right now. That's the reason why we're still standing up.
For years, Filipinos have been regarded as one of the largest ethnic groups in Hawaii. But one community leader feels that not all her fellow kababayans are accounted for and is making sure that more will participate in this year's census. Our Hawaii Bureau Chief, Alfred Asenas, has part one of this report.
My name is Benet Misalucha, and I'm the chair of the Filipino Complete Count Committee.
Eagle News had the privilege to interview Benet Misalucha, who described what the 2020 census is all about.
So the census is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. It's once every 10 years, and it tries to count every living person in the country. So that way, if we know how many people are in the community, it determines a lot of things from redistricting, because, people move around. So in the mainland particularly, they determine the number of representatives, like congressional representatives, from the census. There's also $600+ billion worth of federal funds, and they allocate that depending on the census tracts. Because obviously those communities that have larger populations need to be allocated greater resources.
And so Benet and other community volunteers established the Filipino Complete Count Committee.
So it was organized back late last year because when you look historically at the Filipino census or the response rates, we have traditionally and historically been on the lower end of the spectrum. And this is a sad statement because the census is very important. Our people, for a number of reasons, are not self-responding. And as you know, self-response is actually the ideal way to do the census, is because then you don't need to send people to the respective homes in order to check and double check and verify information. Especially in this time of COVID, it is quite critical that our people self-respond. And so we started with a handful of people, and now it's grown to 50 community leaders representing various community organizations. Everyone from, the Women Association to teachers. We have people in various parts of the economic spectrum.
Bennett also indicated that this civic duty can also help a community build its own credibility.
I want to bring up a point about, and I speak of this not in a political, Democrat versus Republican type of approach. I'm talking about making sure that the Filipinos represent, okay? Because when they see the numbers, accurate numbers, that really sends a message that we have the substantive numbers to make a difference in the community. So we keep saying we're, one of the fastest growing communities in the country. But how do you verify that if you don't have the numbers to prove it? So the census is actually a way to make sure that what we say actually can be validated by the numbers and the data.
And how has the current COVID-19 pandemic affected their efforts?
Original census deadline was July 30th. It's now been extended to October 30th. So that deadline, right now, I think they just started on June 1 to open up their field work. In other words, there are places which, because of COVID, the census has not been able to get to. So even delivery of the census forms has not been done because these are like hard to reach or remote areas. So now they've opened the field offices. In addition to that, though, I guess the timeline that we're shooting for is August 11 or August thereabouts. And that is the time when they will start deploying people to verify information, or those that did not respond would then get a knock on their doors. So for all intents and purposes, this committee is trying to stretch out to the August timeline. So we're trying to raise, and again, trying to get people to be aware so that they can respond to the census. There's actually 3 ways by which they can respond to the census. You get the form and you complete it, right? Now, because of technology, you can do it online. And also, you can call. And the wonderful thing about calling is you can actually choose someone who speaks Tagalog. It's the first time that they've offered it. It's not Ilocano, unfortunately, but Tagalog, the national language. And so you can call a number and they would provide you, and they can go step by step, line by line, and give you information about the census.
Stay tuned for part 2 of my interview with Bennett Misalucha right here on Eagle News. Reporting from Honolulu, Hawaii, I'm Alfred Asenas. We live in interesting times.
Thank you, Alfred. Eagle News, we'll be right back. back. The global economy will contract at least 6% this year due to the economic shutdowns to contain the coronavirus outbreak. That is according to the OECD, or Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Let's listen in.
On the economic front, the 6% decline in global GDP that we foresee in 2020 is larger by far than any we have projected in the 60 years since the OECD was created. Now, hundreds of millions have become unemployed, and now that is in the scenario where no second wave of infections happens. In the event that it would, this kind of double hit, the fall in global GDP would be over 7.5%. And we'd be looking at perhaps 40 million more unemployed.
In the case of a second wave of contagion later in the year, world economic output could shrink by as much as 7.6% in 2020, according to the report. This would be followed in 2021 by GDP growth of between 2.8 and 5.2%. In a previous report in March, by when the outbreak had hit China but not yet the world's other large economies, the OECD slashed its global growth forecast by 0.5 percentage point to 2.4%, which would have been the worst performance since the 2008 financial crisis. The report also said as long as there is no vaccine or treatment against the coronavirus, which has killed more than 400,000 people worldwide to date, policymakers will continue walking a tightrope. Physical distancing to prevent contagion, testing people for the coronavirus, and tracing and isolating those infected will be the main instruments to fight the pandemic. The report also said, quote, but those sectors affected by border closures and those requiring close personal contact, such as tourism, travel, entertainment, restaurants, and accommodation, will not resume as before. It also warned that these steps may not even be enough to prevent a second outbreak. It also said, quote, governments will need to adapt, support, and accompany the transition, allowing fast restructuring processes for firms, global cooperation to tackle the virus with a treatment and vaccine, and a broader resumption of multilateral dialogue will be key for reducing doubt and unlocking economic momentum. Troubled Hong Kong airline Cathay Pacific announced a 39 billion Hong Kong dollar or $5 billion US government-led bailout plan as it battles a crippling downturn caused by the coronavirus. Take a look.
Liquidity position, as you will recall, Cathay Pacific started the year with about $20 billion in unrestricted liquidity, and the current cash burn is in the region of about $2.5 to $3 billion per month. So the reality is that without the new recapitalization plan announced today, that we would very shortly be running out of cash and be at serious risk of collapse. And therefore, the recapitalization plan, as announced today, is absolutely critical to the survival of Cathay Pacific. The various activities that management has taken to ameliorate the cash situation include deferral of aircraft orders, early retirement of certain older aircraft, executive pay cuts, a special leave scheme on a voluntary basis for staff, for which we had an 80% uptake, for which we're very grateful. But despite all of these actions, then our current cash burn is still at that $2.5 to $3 billion level, approximately. So the prospects for recovery at the moment is very difficult to say. We're certainly hopeful of gradual relaxation in travel restrictions in many of our markets, but the situation remains very dynamic, and we'll just have to remain agile and flexible and react to the situation as it develops.
Okay.
Under the proposal, Cathay will raise about 11.7 billion Hong Kong dollars in a rights issue on the basis of 7 rights shares for every 11 existing shares held, while preference shares will be sold to the government for 19.5 billion Hong Kong dollars and warrants for 1.95 billion Hong Kong dollars subject to adjustment. Share trading in Cathay Pacific and its 2 biggest shareholders, Air China and Swire, was suspended in Hong Kong on Tuesday morning ahead of the announcement. They will resume trading Wednesday, according to Cathay. Swire, a Hong Kong and British conglomerate with colonial-era roots, has a 45% stake in Cathay, while Air China owns 30%. Once the recapitalization plan is complete, Aviation 2020 will take a 6% stake, while Swire's shares will be reduced to 42% and Air China's to 28%. Aviation 2020 will also be allowed to send 2 observers to attend board meetings. Like many carriers hammered by the crisis, the company has seen passenger numbers evaporate in recent months, leaving most of its fleet sitting on the tarmac and the firm hemorrhaging cash. The airline was already under pressure after taking a hit from months of sometimes violent protests in Hong Kong last year that saw tourism battered. And light passengers form long queues at document checkpoints following new rules to prevent the spread of the coronavirus at Jakarta's international airport. Officials and airlines require travelers now to present multiple documents, including health certificates, for clearance to board the aircraft.
Iya, pandemi inilah pemicu juga kan, ikut pemicu. Udah 2 bulan saya vakum, nggak ada kerjaan. Saya sementara di sini ngontrak uang kontrakan saya mesti bayar tiap bulan. Jadi saya mau ngomong kan harus apa untuk bayar kontrakan lagi, saya kan nggak kerja gitu, nggak ada pemasukan. Makanya saya usahain hari ini saya harus bisa terbang, karena saya kalau mau pulang pun udah nggak ada tempat.
Cabin crew in protective suits, health certifications for passengers, mandatory face masks, and longer check-in times. This is the new reality of mass air travel as people dream of taking to the skies once more. They face the prospect that changes to curb the spread of the coronavirus will be even more challenging than those brought in after the 2001 terror attacks in the United States. In addition to the strict security measures commonplace around the world, since then, passengers will now encounter a barrage of checks for COVID-19. The United Nations Civil Aviation Agency has drawn up a set of guidelines for safe flying in the wake of the pandemic, from mandatory wearing of masks to the disinfection of areas people come in contact with. In addition, industry body, the International Air Transport Association, or IATA, has suggested governments collect passenger data, including health information ahead of travel, and that access to airports be restricted to staff and same-day travelers. Other measures outlined in their guidelines include the redesign of gate areas to reduce congestion, faster and smoother boarding and baggage collection procedures, and even prohibiting queues for the washrooms to limit passenger interaction.
Aujourd'hui, Air France a pris un certain nombre de mesures, donc le port du masque en est un. Nous avons également un nettoyage très approfondi de nos avions et nos avions sont régulièrement désinfectés avec du virucide. Une chose très importante aussi qu'il faut savoir, c'est que l'air de nos avions est renouvelé toutes les 3 minutes. On a des filtres vraiment de haute efficacité qui ne permettent pas justement à ces petites particules, ces virus de passer. Et ça, c'est vraiment une chose très importante pour préserver la sécurité de nos passagers.
Voir que l'air présent en cabine vient pour 50% à peu près de l'extérieur de l'avion. Ça passe par des groupes de conditionnement d'air pour avoir de l'air à la bonne température. Et les 50 autres %, c'est de l'air qui est prélevé en cabine, qui passe au travers de filtres et qui est réinjecté avec l'air climatisé.
Aujourd'hui, les coefficients de remplissage d'Air France oscillent entre 30 et 50%, avec une moyenne de 40%, ce qui nous permet de gérer complètement la distanciation physique à bord de nos avions.
Implementing new regulations is already proving challenging and chaotic. There are some signs of recovery as major economies ease lockdowns, with IATA pointing to a growth in flight numbers from April to May, but flying looks set to struggle to return to pre-virus levels. A confusing patchwork of rules imposed by countries at different stages in tackling their outbreaks makes it tricky for consumers to plan holidays or visit family abroad. Some nations are maintaining bans on travelers from hard-hit nations or requiring people to enter quarantine on arrival, typically for a 14-day period. Countries that have kept the virus in check are looking at creating travel bubbles or reciprocal agreements with other places on similar outbreak curves. But these can have onerous requirements. A fast lane for essential business and official travel between some parts of China and Singapore has been launched, but travelers need sponsorship and have to take a virus test before departure and on arrival. Many who previously flew frequently may simply choose not to for the time being. In other news, seemingly unaffected by the controversy in the global scientific community, Greece has resumed production of chloroquine to treat cases of coronavirus and is conducting clinical trials with a calm and distant approach. According to scientists there, chloroquine, an anti-malarial drug, and hydroxychloroquine, a related compound normally used to treat arthritis, have been among the most high-profile drugs being tested for use against COVID-19. But last week, a major UK trial run by Oxford University halted its test of the drug, saying there was no evidence they worked against the new coronavirus in hospitalized patients. Take a look.
In terms of scale, we were able to secure enough active pharmaceutical ingredient for 24 million dosages that we have pledged to grant to the Greek national healthcare system. People in Greece, the public, healthcare professionals, institutional people with institutional roles, they maintain a very calm and distant approach to chloroquine. So the idea is that we wait and see. We wait for the results. We're also remaining vigilant for a possible second wave that could take place at the end of summer or start of fall. So generally we keep at a high alert level, calm and ready.
The move came just after the World Health Organization resumed its own trials after briefly suspending them in response to a now retracted study in The Lancet. Last week's retraction of The Lancet study, which had found the drugs had no benefit in treating coronavirus and even increased the likelihood of patients dying in hospital, rocked public opinion and the scientific community. However, the manufacture of both medications has continued in many countries in Europe. France's Sanofi produces hydroxychloroquine sulfate at a site in Hungary. The drug itself, under the brand name Plaquenil, is manufactured at two large production sites in Spain and France. Plaquenil is exported to several countries where hydroxychloroquine is not produced, such as Greece, Poland, and Estonia. In Bulgaria, chloroquine from the state laboratory Bulbio is used for treating COVID-19 patients. Poland, which also authorizes its use, is considered a major producer of chloroquine, with company Adamed producing it under the name Arikin. Questioned by AFP, a Hungarian government spokesman stressed that the drug was not administered to new patients but only to those who have already started treatment. To other news now, people in North Korea take to the streets in an organized march against South Korean authorities and defectors from the north. Large groups of young men and women parade down the street with fists raised as a car with loudspeakers follows. Take a look. In a related news, Andrei Lankov, the director of Korea Risk Group, said he expects to see a gradual escalation of threats from North Korea. The country has recently severed all official communication links with South Korea and denounced activists sending anti-Pyongyang leaflets over the border in recent months, also carrying out weapons tests and shooting at a Southern Guard post in the DMZ. Take a look.
I would say that we should see a gradual escalation. And because so far South Koreans are not paying much attention to the North Korean threats, well, probably we are going to see more threats and maybe some action. And it's probably the first stage in the kind of escalation building activities we are going to see. I would probably expect some exchange of fire on the DMZ, maybe some kind of rather dramatic actions of all possible kinds. Well, this is North Korean policy. They want to show to the they want to show to the South Korean government, and above all to the South Korean voters, that their demand for financial giveaways cannot be ignored completely and safely. And they will, the South Korean government will insist that it's not a big deal, as long as it's humanly possible. They will claim that all shooting incidents were results of misunderstanding and mistakes. They will smile broadly and keep suggesting to have some wonderful joint actions like a pop music concert on the DMZ or maybe a soccer match, as if this is what North Koreans need. Developments. And now it's clear that in the United States they forgot about the existence of a small nuclear country called North Korea. They don't care anymore, and we should not expect any serious activity on the kind of from the United States. So so probably they decided it's a good time now to start beating the South Koreans in order to squeeze from them more aid or maybe create problems and teach a lesson to the future South Korean governments, to show them that North Korea should not be ignored, otherwise it will make a lot of trouble. And if you ask...
The Iglesia Ni Cristo Church of Christ celebrated the frontliners of Hampton Roads region in Virginia. And reporting from Virginia, here's Sarah Nachman.
The U.S. death toll of COVID-19 recently just passed 100,000. Healthcare workers, COVID frontline workers, are faced with the deadly virus every day. And so the Church of Christ, or Iglesia Ni Cristo, from the Hampton Roads region appreciated them today. The event started with a car parade that was guided and assisted by the City of Virginia Beach Police Motorcycle Unit. Over 100 Centera Princess Anne Hospital staff, including their president, Paul Gadden, greeted the procession of cars, decorated with balloons and encouraging messages.
We are so appreciative of the outpouring of support that we just received here this morning, and want to thank the congregation for everything that you've done and that you're doing and that you will do.
What we are doing today is an activity of the Church of Christ, or the Iglesia Ni Cristo, wherein we are giving back to the community. It is called an INC giving activity. It is very important that we recognize those who go out of their way and beyond the call of duty for the sake of others. And sometimes our frontliners are not appreciated, and so we are actually appreciating them today.
Virginia Beach Mayor Bobby Dyer and council members Sabrina Wooten and Michael Berlucci joined the church in the appreciation.
I just want to thank the Church of Christ for sponsoring an event here at the Princess Anne Centera Hospital, honoring our heroes, our first responders.
In addition to the parade, church members from the congregations of Chesapeake, Norfolk, Newport News, Richmond, and Virginia Beach provided the COVID-19 frontliners with 100 boxes of pizza, cases of bottled water, and gift baskets of snacks. Children-made greeting cards and drawings were included in the gift baskets. In Virginia Beach, Sarah Nachman, Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
Thank you, Sarah. Before we close, we leave you with a word of hope. At the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. See you again tomorrow evening. Good night. I'm Alma Angeles. We live in interesting times.
This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Hello dear friends, you are watching the Iglesia ni Cristo and the Bible. As we heard in the news, there are countries who have declared that they were able to contain COVID-19. Others cite their declining new cases and increasing rate of recovery. Others have started opening their borders and have allowed essential businesses and other vital industries to resume their operations. But still others cannot open because of certain restrictions that are being implemented to avoid the spike of COVID-19 cases. As people try to transition to the new normal, they still cannot stop asking or avoid asking what's next. When 2020 began, successive tragedies, calamities, and fighting preceded this pandemic, leaving many people afraid and discouraged, thinking of what will happen in the immediate future. The reality